to the 14,001 standard and the release 2026 version, and just give some interpretation as to what they might mean in practice. Okay, and I'll try and include some engineering examples just to kind of help you understand what we're talking about as I go. So just very, very briefly, I'm not going to go into this. Just some of you may well be aware of your customers might be asking more and more for information on environmental issues. Just some of the drivers for this. So what we have is these are an ESG frameworks, so sustainability frameworks, and the most popular ones. ESG is environmental sustainability and governance, so environment social governance frameworks, and ISO standards really need to keep up with what's current for business, so they do a little bit of horizon scanning, and they make sure that the standards released able to meet what businesses are being asked by their supply chain. So with more exacting ESG requirements, larger companies are having to sort of basically provide more information for ESG. They're having to report the carbon emissions to important stakeholders, in particular financial stakeholders such as insurers, investors. And there's increasing pressure to report not only their own emissions, but to understand the emissions from their supply chain, value chain. So larger customers are increasingly requesting information from engineering suppliers about the carbon emissions or energy use, recycled material content, waste, water use, responsible sourcing, and even environmental incidents. So 14,001 is kind of realigning itself. It can provide the management processes and the information needed to be able to respond to the requests from larger companies, including public sector as well, and a small fabrication company. So larger businesses are having to do this, perhaps. Public sector, the MOD, they're also supporting this because it's United Nations, lines with the United Nations Sustainability SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. And so a small fabrication company, a small engineering company might not have to publish a sustainability report themselves, but customers will be starting to ask about the carbon associated with metal, steel, etc., their energy consumption and recycled content of products and things, waste recovery, transport. So they do travel down the supply chain. So this is one of the reasons that 14,001 is trying to help organizations, businesses to meet these requirements. So ISO has agreed to support the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So it's not just 14,001, it's management systems with requirements. So for example, there's an amendment to all of the management system requirements that came out in 2024, Amendment 1 on climate change, and applies to all management systems. So that's it's not just 14,001. You'll see kind of sustainable development goals creeping into other standards as well. Right, that's all I'm going to say about ESG and things. Right, so 14,001 was first published 30 years ago, 1996, and there are about 500,000 certifications worldwide. Second edition basically was sort of the same as 1996, it just clarified and refined what it meant. So it was kind of a cleaner interpretation, cleaner language. Third edition, major restructure changes, restructure according to what was called Annex SL, it's still called Annex SL. And basically the technical committee of the standards said it's not a fundamental rewrite, it's refinement. And all of the standards are saying really evolution, not revolution. So it's not small changes, it's not major changes, they're classing it as moderate. So what does that mean? So it's been changed for two specific reasons. One is to incorporate changes relating to harmonization across the ISO management system standards. So some sort of terminology, some is reordering, so reorganization of the clauses, which will also align with other management system standards, and also perhaps relocating some parts of the standard. So again, it sort of aligns better, it harmonizes more, and adding some sub-clauses in. But the other reason is clarification of the original content. Okay, so on the face of it, it doesn't really alter the intent of the standard, but it can mean that for some organisations, they do have to make some changes. For others, depends on what you've done. You go through the standard, you might think, well, depending on how you put the EMS in and how you've evolved it since 2015, you might find there's not that much to do. Okay, so the key thing is the version of the standard is giving greater clarity on what the EMS expects, okay, and expects to consider. So, for an engineering company, the EMS shouldn't really be separate to what it's doing. So if you're making decisions about machinery or materials or factory layout or production, they should really be included in the environmental standard somewhere, because it can affect environmental performance for the future. So again, I don't want to go rattling on about sustainability a lot, but the introduction, 14,001, has positioned itself to basically support the environmental sustainability part of sustainability. And it says, achieving balance between the environment, society, economy is considered essential to meet the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. And sustainable development is a goal achieved by balancing the three pillars of sustainability, undermining the environmental. The environment can carry financial, social, and business consequences, not just environmental implications. So that's what it now says in the background. And 14,001 can be the mechanics behind this. Okay, so moving on. So what's changed? So looking at the clause 3 of the standard, which are terms and definitions. First off, some of the terms have been removed. So they've gone through and adjusted some of the terms and definitions. So risk has been removed as a term. It's been removed from the standard, but I note in the FDIS for 9001 it still exists. The risk has been removed because there was some conflicted ideas about risk and risk management. So what risk meant. So risk's been removed and risk and opportunities remained, but it's been changed a little bit. So risk is now really defined as an adverse or negative effect, and opportunities a benefit. Okay, so threat's been removed. So risk is adverse, negative, opportunities beneficial, positive. The other thing that's changed is outsource has been removed. So outsourcing has been removed because quality for some time, for the 2015 version, talked about externally provided processes, products or services. It's a much wider term. So in the standard, we're not using outsource anymore. You'll find that where outsource was, it's now talking about externally provided process, products or services, which aren't defined. And you also have indicator, which is now redefined as quantitative, qualitative, binary variable. So it's trying to modernize it because this definition may be able to accommodate digital automated monitoring. Okay, so for engineering companies, indicators might include electricity per production hour, might be something like waste per ton manufactured, coolant consumptions, percentage scrap. So that's changed. Okay, so there's other things that have been changed as well. So for example, policy has been added in. So you've got policy, and then look at environmental policy as a definition. It's kind of linking back to the new policy definition. So there's a few changes, but they're kind of probably the ones that are outstanding, are the ones that I want to talk about. So looking at the requirement clauses, so clauses 4 to 10, the things where you have to do something. So it's technically it's a new requirement. So it's saying when identifying, so when you look at what 4.1 said, it talked about internal, external issues, and it also talked about environmental conditions. Okay, so you had to determine your environmental conditions and how they could affect the outcomes of your system. Okay, so definition in 14,001 of an environmental condition, state or characteristic of the environment is determined at a certain point of time. So it did leave that up to you for you to decide on what they might be. Okay, this now does force an organisation's hand now, because you have in the environmental conditions some listed, it explicitly lists some environmental conditions, which are pollution levels, available to natural resources, climate change, biodiversity, or ecosystem health. So what do you have to do? You've got to consider these when you look at environmental conditions. You've got to consider them and decide if they are something you should be taking into account. And if you do need to take these into account, then they will come into your risks and opportunities. So if you've got a risks and opportunities register, which pops up in 611. So if what have you got to do for an auditor coming in? And if you look at UCAS have actually got some information for certification bodies on what they should be focusing on when you transition to 14001. And they should be looking at clause 4.1, subclause 4.1. And you should really be looking to evidence this in some way, okay? Or justify why it's not relevant. It doesn't mean to say that you need to have more evidence than you've got now. What I mean is, as a small business, it may well be you don't have documented evidence, documented records. So depending what you have now, if you're doing a pest analysis or a SWOT analysis, then you need to go and have a look and check that you've included those conditions within those, if it's written down, if that's what you do. And if included, and you are considering them in your risks opportunities, or you've justified why you're not doing anything, that's fine. Okay. Leads on to subclause 4.2. This is a note, and this really leads into the fact that what I've been talking about, what your customers may be wanting from you in terms of data. So in many ways, that is really going to be driven by your customers, interested parties, changing legislation by the UK government to support environmental sustainability goals. Okay, so I hope that's okay. Other thing that's changed is subclause 4.3. So it's extending the requirement to consider, when you think about control and influence, it defines what it means over the life cycle of its activities, products and services. So what does this mean? This means that you've got to see whether your scope does actually cover that. So does it cover all your activities, products and services that you can control and influence? And does it kind of include the life cycle of those as well? So other things which are all the way through the standard, the 2015 version talks about maintaining and retaining documents. That's gone from any reference to documentation. There's no maintain or retain. So all the way through, it's talking about available as document information. And what does this mean? It means that if a document needs to be available to be used by somebody who's got a purpose to use it, including auditors coming in and asking for the information, then if they ask for it, it should be available to them. So anybody who needs to use the information for whatever reason, it should be there for them. Okay. So so the thing is, just make a point. Just looking at this, really, there's a massive difference between a small company, my precision engineering company, when you look at 4.1. And you've got an established estate, it's kind of heavily built up, there's nothing, it's completely not next to anything of any note. But there's a difference between a large company or something beside a river system. So that's kind of what environmental conditions are sort of talking about here. Right, okay, so moving on to actions. So what should you do? Review what you have for context of the organisation. See if you are already considering it. However you do that, whether a small business, it might be you've had the discussion, you've fully gone through environmental conditions, everything's fine, or you pest SWOT analysis. So check those. think about your stakeholder needs analysis. Do I need to update those? And does your scope cover what it needs to cover? And if these change, any of these change, then it means that the rest of your management system is going to have to pick these ideas up and manage them through the rest of the clause in the standard. Okay, leadership commitment. So 5.1, it's really strengthening top management accountability through widening application of the environmental policy. So it's putting more emphasis on not just the commitment statements within the policy statement, but it's kind of moved a note which is about the expectations, the environmental policy, that you should really be putting any other specific commitments within your policy statement if you don't. So, for example, if you are, you're contributing to climate change, whatever, then you might actually put within your policy statement kind of a little bit about what you're trying to do with your environmental management system on climate change mitigation, or include that as a phrase. Okay, so that's what you need to do. And what this really means for, and it should always mean, it might be top management involvement. We're talking about in terms of leadership. It might involve approving investment in more efficient machinery, leak detection, energy monitoring. So it's not just demonstrated by signing a policy. Okay, smaller organizations, it's not asking for. So it's in many ways it's strengthening. It's strengthening sort of the governance of the environmental management system. Yeah, it's not asking for decision-making frameworks and governance structures, but it's moving. It's trying to move the standard, not totally away from operational control, but towards more leadership involvement in governing and frameworks for decision-making, etc. Yeah, small organisation. It doesn't mean to say you've got to have complex governance structures. It's asking the person who makes decisions about, investment in machinery or whatever, money, equipment, to consider environmental implications and take these into account. So have a look and review, update your environmental policy. Determine if you do have additional commitments, and they might be already existing anyway. So you strengthen your policy by including these in, and make sure that the leadership are briefed on kind of what they're expected to do in terms of the commitments that are included in the policy statement. What's happened in planning? So this has been a restructuring of the clause, because if you looked at the way the standard flows, action, stress, risk and opportunities, you had a big general section which kind of said, look at the whole of contextual issues, look at the rest of what's in 6.1, and then pull these together and think about risks and opportunities. So it's now kind of shortened the general bit and just said you shall establish, implement, maintain processes to meet the requirements of the subclauses. So there's an expectation there. And basically, if you looked at, say, aspects and impacts, compliance, they've all got the same title. It's just they've added in a new one, 614. So they've moved the content of 611, a lot of the information to be given a new title, risks and opportunities, being relocated so it flows. So really, you should be identifying aspects and impacts, considering compliance, and out of those should come your risks and opportunities. So again, planning action has just been renumbered. So again, it's there. It's just been moved down an idea. So when we think about things like risks and opportunities, it could be things like customer. There's a risk might be that the customer is requiring you to verify product carbon data, but you can't identify the material energy consumption by product. So that's a risk to your business because you're not meeting customer requirements. An opportunity could be, learning more about energy usage by submetering to identify where using excessive energy, those kind of things. That kind of would map with that. Okay, so it's no change really, but it's clearer. And not every entry in a risk register would require an action plan. You've got to determine what risks and opportunities require action, and choose proportionate and check where the actions worked. So that's what we're looking for here. So review, refresh your risk and opportunity documents, and PDCA manage. So it's one of my colleagues, Dave White, if you come across him. So what it means by PDCA is if you have identified things you need to do, it could be risks and opportunities or planning actions you need to take, then you need to plan what you're going to do, implement those processes, monitor the work, review actions, and make sure things are in place. Okay, so that's what that means. So refresh your risks and opportunities documents, gives an opportunity to do this. You don't have to change anything in your system unless you have linked these to the clauses. So you might need to do a little bit of tidying up if you've referenced the clause numbers somewhere. Okay, so planning. So that's kind of the structure of the standard in planning, how it's changed. This is some of the content. So what have we got in planning? So we've got a subclause, or subclause 612 environmental aspects, which is there. It's trying to clarify what is meant by the previous version of the standard when we talk about life cycle perspective. So it gives a note, and life cycle perspective includes consideration of the environmental aspects and impacts of each life cycle stage. And the stages include acquisition of raw materials, design, production, transportation, delivery, use, end of life treatment, final disposal. So for an engineered product, you should be considering here for life cycle examples, things like material specifications, are using recycled or virgin material content, any hazardous substances, design, the life of the design, how long it's going to last, how you're going to repair it, how you're going to maintain it, or how are your users going to, or customers going to repair and maintain it. Manufacturing energy use, waste use from manufacturing that product, packaging, etc., and down to reuse and recycling of your engineered part at the end. Okay. Other things that are included in planning now, a completely new subclause is 6.3. It's new to the standard, but planning was in the 14,001 standard. It was referenced in aspects and referenced in operation planning control. So, so for change management, it also aligns with the quality standard now. So quality puts management of changes in planning. It doesn't require a management of change procedure or process, but if you have one already, then you need to kind of link those together. So you need to have a look at that. So change management, obviously especially relevant to engineering companies, and it means that really you should be thinking about the environmental implications and have a defined process for doing so. So it doesn't have to be documented, but does have to be defined. So consider environmental implications as part of the change. So before you fully commit to the change, you should have actually considered the environmental implications as part of what you're doing. So it could be just purchasing a new CNC machine, or introducing welding, robotic welding, or changing chemicals. At that stage, you should be also considering the environmental implications. Okay, so it might be if you have, as I say, look at how you manage change now, look if it's documented, but if you don't have a process, it does require a structured approach to change management. Okay, so support. So I've kind of mentioned already about document formation, so don't really need to talk about that too much. But that's kind of really the big thing in there. So in support, there's no really specific action requirements in there. For operations, outsourced processes now talk about externally provided process products or services. So that means that if you were looking at outsourced processes, and outsourced process is still relevant if you use it, because you still might be outsourcing. You've got outsourcing might be manufacturing to a particular supplier of something, whatever. But it obviously it goes beyond outsourcing. So I need to look at how I manage externally provided processed products and services. So what kind of things do I ask in terms of suppliers, contractors? So more scrutiny on these. Again, this might be something that you haven't overlooked and is built into your system, particularly if you integrated your standards with, say, quality, environment, health and safety, for example. They're integrated in some way, then you might already be doing this. So you're looking really at procurement, purchasing, whichever you call it, and in your procurement processes, then you need to include some consideration of environmental issues within that. So for example, if I've got a higher priority external provider, there might be things, for example, heat treatment providers, waste contractors, chemical suppliers, maintenance contractors, things which are going to have an environmental impact. If I'm looking at my pens and where I get my pens from, routine stationery or pens or pencils or whatever, it's not really going to justify the same level of control, really. So you might have to look at your PQQs, so your pre-qualification questionnaires, your invitations to tender, if you've got an approved suppliers list, approved contractors list, those kind of things. And the other thing is emergency preparedness aligns more aspects now. So you'd expect that in your aspects evaluation, if you've identified particular environmental emergency conditions in your planning, then you need to obviously have a plan for managing those in your operational control. So yeah, links very strongly. So again, looking at a gap analysis, you need to look to see, do your existing supply contractor management processes, do they actually manage environmental issues? To what extent? Do you need to beef those up a bit and improve them? And also emergency planning. Okay, so emergency examples, often people just think of fire and spills, but it could be things like, failure of equipment, could be extraction equipment, abatement equipment, could be an emergency, or, chemical reaction, in your storage, or a flood affecting areas, particularly if they're kind of going to take up chemicals or waste storage areas, so they're going to contaminate the flood waters, those kind of things. Yeah. So again, might be just having a check to see you've got these things. It may well be you do have to improve them. It may well be you have to look at it afresh. I don't know. Right, performance valuation. What have we got here? So explicit requirement to evaluate environment performance and the EMS effectiveness. It was always there. So what happens is with these standards, if you read them, and not you personally, but in general, companies reading these, if you overlook certain things, they kind of relocate things to give it a little bit more priority. So EMS effectiveness was already there. It was a line within the kind of 911, a bit further down. So it's not just about evaluating performance, it's that as well. So are you doing that? So okay, so it's not a new requirement, but you might need to have a think about that, because the emphasis on also EMS effectiveness. So again, your auditors will be looking to see that you've checked it out, and it may well be that you haven't done much on it, and you need to improve that. So EMS effectiveness could be things like are non-conformities being closed out effectively within the time frame they should be, as an example. Internal auditing, again, some of you will know us because you've been on our auditing courses, and for years we've already taught this. We teach this anyway. But in internal audit program, it's also in quality as well. It was a requirement of the audit program to talk about and define scope and criteria for your audits. You now have to, it's mandated to also describe the objectives for the audits as well. So define the objectives for the audit. So what does this all if I'm talking about scope of an audit, that could be audit the machine shop, yeah, an audit of the machine shop, which is the scope. But the audit objective could be to determine. So we normally use a verb. So determine, assess, evaluate, confirm, verify. So we tend to use a verb. So this is what we're doing. So the audit objective should explain what the audit is trying to achieve. If you're unclear on this, so an example could be determine whether waste and energy controls are implemented or effectively implemented in the machine shop would be an objective. Okay. Management reviews have now been restructured into 3 subclauses. So namely, general inputs and outputs aligns with 9001, so harmonized structure. So so you have got sort of a clause which is 9.3.1, 9.3.2, etc. So there's no real additional requirements really for that. Okay. So again, it might be just tidying up the documentation that you use to signpost people to different bits in your system. So, for example, for management review, if you're referencing clause numbers for some reason, I don't know if you are, so you might have to tidy up a little bit of those kind of documents, review things. But basically, check that your internal audit system, that you are setting up audit objectives for each audit. They don't have to be specific, okay, but perhaps we might want to discuss that. So what I mean is sometimes you might be doing the same thing, but in a different area. But improvement. So improvement. So what's happened for this clause used to be 10.1, 2, and 3. So 10.1 was general, 10.2 non-conformity corrective actions. That's pretty much the same. And 10.3 was continued improvement. What they've done is they've combined the contents of 10.1 and 10.3, general and continued improvement, into one, and they've tried to signpost things much better. If you also are responsible for 45,001, which was very well signposted when it first came out, they've kind of learned from that, and they're doing that for this standard. So mandatory link between the outputs produced from clause 9, which is performance evaluation. So what's happening in, what's your monitoring and management analysis evaluation saying? What's your internal audits giving you information on? What's management review considering is important? And 10.2, what's happening in your, what non-conformities are coming out? All of that can then be used to decide on what you want to improve on. Okay. So, for example, if your monitoring shows that your scrap's increasing every time you're manufacturing something, particular product, particular line of something, then it shouldn't be just disposing of the scrap that's been produced. It should be, well, let's go and have a look and look at the tooling, look at the process, look at the programming, and try and improve it to stop, to improve it, to redesign the process, or to identify where some of the issues are and get rid of them. Okay, so review existing processes, which manage improvements. So do they link up to these clauses? Have you got a continued improvement process? Where does it get the information from? Is that considered? So if it's not considering what's in performance evaluation and in non-conformity corrective action, then it should really. Okay. Annex A. So Annex A is been beefed up a lot. Annex B has disappeared, but Annex A is explanatory information, and a lot of people don't read it. I always try and get people to read it or signpost it, because what it's doing is it's valuable because it's explaining intended interpretation requirements. It's not adding new requirements. So it's trying to give you an understanding of what things are about. It's been significantly added to by the standard. Okay, so looking at what you might want to do in 4.1 now, what that means. If you looked at A 4.1, then that will give you perhaps a more rounded information on that. Other things that you might want to be aware of, the Technical Committee for Environmental Management are bringing out what's called the 14002 series. They've already brought out ones, so guidelines for using 14001 to address environmental aspects and conditions within the topic area. So water has come out, and climate change, resources and waste are there. I'm not saying, particularly for small businesses, if you have a 14001 system, go and have a look at these, go and buy them. All of these standards cost money, and to be fair, they are expensive. If you have access to these standards because you subscribe to things like Barber, whatever, or ISO, you might have access to those. I'm just making aware of this growing series. If you can't access these yourself because it's expensive to buy, you can't access standards, then business libraries, and I always do tell people about this on my course, the business libraries, so there's one in Newcastle, for example, allow you to go and have a look at the standards and read them. You can't print them off, but anything that's changed, you can review. Okay, or perhaps look at some of these and perhaps help. They might help you understand kind of more about environmental management systems. So for an engineering company, what's it mean? Although 14001 does apply to every sector, it's a generic standard, but examples that you might be relevant to you as engineering companies, manufacturing companies, supplier, supplying engineering products and things. So it may include, machining, fabrication, etc. And environmental conditions. So consider climate resilience, resources, local pollution, ecosystems. So what's the impact on that? Are you resilient? Have you looked at your climate resilience? So what would happen? What's going to happen when temperatures go up? You might be potentially flooded more. So really weather changes in weather systems and things. Life cycle perspective. Are you considering materials? Life cycle materials, your design, your production, use, repair, and end of life, and what you're doing. Risks and opportunities. If you look at risks and opportunities, you might have a risk register, risk and opportunities register. But are these issues linked to environmental decisions as well, or decisions which could affect the environmental system, have environmental implications? So, that should perhaps review that. Planning changes. So when you're planning something new, Clause 6.3 is requiring that you should be considering environmental implications in your planning process if you're not now doing that. Okay. External providers, so supply chain, suppliers and things, you now need to think about which things are going to, perhaps bring environmental issues or things that you have to perhaps get data from for actually providing that to your customers, your key customers. So they might be asking for information that you have to get from your suppliers to be able to give them the data and a more complete picture. And I'm sure you've come across scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions for climate change. So we all have got a good idea that the larger businesses are now asking for carbon emissions from their supply chain because they can see that's going to come in at some point. And, just have a look at performance evaluation, continued improvement, and check that you're meeting the standards. Right, transition timeframe and action. You don't necessarily need to have. So what happens with transition? Doesn't mean to say that you're going to wait for 3 years till you're recertified to transition. You can your certification body may well include a transition audit within your normal surveillance processes, and that might be up to you. So in terms of timelines, it was published 17th of April, so three years on. Kind of expected date is at the 18th of April, but it's towards the end of April anyway. Still not confirmed. I haven't seen that anywhere. There is an international body called the International Accreditation Forum, which has now been kind of moved into, it's been replaced by what's called Global ACI, Accreditation Corporation Incorporated, and you might actually find dates and things given to certification bodies by that organisation or from UCAS, but your certification body, I'm sure, will give you the details of when your deadline is. So suggested actions for transition, a gap analysis. It's always, when the change stands, always a perfect opportunity to go and review, refresh your systems, and perhaps get your managers involved as well. Managers, senior managers involved in understanding what the changes are. It's always a good learning point for systems, and it's a good way to kind of push your systems on a little bit. You might need to train out some of the implications, or brief out some of the implications for people who are in charge of various things like procurement, etc. You might need to make some documentation changes, hopefully not extensively. You might need to, you might need to review some processes and things, procurement being perhaps one of those. And you need to have a look at your internal audit system to make sure that you are defining objectives and things, okay? And audit the changes and include them in your management review, if to prove your certification body that you've actually made proper changes. And very, very quickly, because I'm looking at the time, I'm trying to talk as quickly as possible. Go live date for IRCA was June the 2026. All courses that we run, but a lot of other providers, they've updated the 2026 version. You can only get a 2015 course up until November, and then you won't be able to get an IRCA approved one. CQI and IRCA, Chartered Quality Institute, IRCA, International Registered Certificated Auditors. These are the badges that people kind of value in terms of courses that give credibility to the training, and also for CPD reasons. And ISEP is the Institute for Sustainability and Environmental Practitioners, used to be IEMA, if you've heard of that. So we also run a co-branded course, the lead audit course there. But we also as well can help you discuss any training needs, as particularly when you're looking at the quality standard changing and the health and safety standard changing in March. So it may well be that you want to discuss how you're going to approach those and what you can do. So we're happy to build a package for you. From IRCA point of view, so these are, and we can drop these into, because we are going to give a slide pack, so I'll give these links to Ailsa. So if you want to go to IRCA, there is, if you are looking at briefing notes for yourself or for your auditors, there's some briefing notes there, which are quite useful if you haven't come across them so far. If you're an existing IRCA trained auditor, so you are, you've done an internal audit course for 2015 or a lead auditor course for 2015, then IRCA, at the minute, certification bodies are giving sort of, full day courses and things to update yourselves. IRCA have been a little bit woolly. They said they will accept the courses provided they meet their requirements, but then they haven't actually said what those requirements are, and we've pushed them quite a few times. There is an online e-learning course, so it's on demand, so you can work your way through. It's quite cheap, so depending whether you're a member or not, it's going to cost £30 to £39. It says it's 60 to 90 minutes. That would be going some. You can do it over a phased period. You don't have to do it 90 minutes. You could take half a day or something. You do a little bit and then go and do some work and do a little bit more. And there is a knowledge check at the end to pass. And you can actually access the course. So provided, if you pass the course or not, you can go back to that material for up to a year. Okay. Don't normally kind of promote IRCA this much, but it's not the only way to satisfy any transition requirements. Maybe, for example, you can put something together yourself, perhaps, or as I say, go with somebody who's put something together, provided you're covering the changes in the standard and what they mean for an auditor. You might be aware or not that 19,011, which is guidance for management system audits, was also changed this year. So it was published in May 2026, as replaced 2018. And for people interested in that, that's about a lot of it's to do with remote auditing techniques and what's called hybrid auditing. So if you're doing some things where you're going auditing face to face, so you're physically on site, but then you're also building in some remote auditing, that's what I mean by hybrid. So it's requiring you not just to kind of add a few things in, it's all the way through the audit process. So from the audit program, if you're in charge of the audit program, to as an auditor, how you plan, conduct, report, and audit. If it's remote, okay, so that's what that's about. Right, and I shall shut up now. I'll stop sharing. And I've galloped through that. I don't know, I hope that was useful to you. But have you got any questions at all?
Wendy, yeah, it was good canter through the thing, but yeah, we will be sending out the pack of information. And obviously Wendy's going to be available if you've got any extra questions afterwards. But has anybody got anything that they want to specifically ask now? If not,
Oh,
I've got a couple.
or anything that you want to go over, you know, if you want some extra clarification, I'll gallop through it. So,
Any questions?
did you have a nice lunch anyway?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, right. I've got a couple, so I'm
Mm-hmm.
just going to ask a couple of questions, if that's all right. So, got one here and saying, in terms of if you're an internal lead auditor,
Mm-hmm.
what evidence is going to demonstrate that you've effectively embedded the new changes? So, what sort of evidence would you need to be able to provide to be able to show what you've done to change and how you've changed it?
Okay, well, it kind of goes back to the context of the organisation clause, really. So everything leads back to that, really, pretty much. So if you have you got a pest analysis or a SWOT analysis or nothing, you know, but you've sat down and worked out what the environmental conditions, you've gone through the explicit conditions in there. So you've looked at your pollution, you know, looked at pollution control. And the other thing is with environmental conditions, and when I've taught this, I mean, I did mention that it might be a nearby river, a river next to you. That is something you've got to take account. So it's a local condition. You could be affecting by pumping out wastewater into the river, you know, the local river and changing the river quality. It's kind of talking in Annex A about local, national, global. So a wider view of what an environmental condition is when you look at pollution control or climate change or whatever. So again, you know, if you've done a pest analysis or SWOT analysis, I would expect those explicit conditions to be included in that. Okay, and for you to actually then look at that information and track it through your system. So if when you've looked at those, which you should have anyway, to be fair, but if you looked at those and you go, well, actually, yeah, this is a risk to us, and we should really look at our risk register and opportunities register more carefully on these things. Perhaps we didn't do a very good job of it. You should be able to track that through as an audit trail from the explicit conditions to the risks and opportunities to the actions within your system. So the planning clause, you know, in 6. So how have you planned? And then once you've actually thought, yeah, we do have to do something about these, we do need to include them in what we do, it then goes into the kind of into your processes, into the actual operation controls themselves. Yeah. Does that make sense? So in many ways, it's what you have now in 4, what you've done now in 4 is going to inform how much work you need to probably do, if that makes sense. Yeah. And if and it and also you could in context the organization, you could look at those and go, well, actually, we have thought of those, and really they're not something we'd need to do something on. You know, it's a small engineering company, you can't save the world. You know, you've got to kind of, so it's you know, it shouldn't be trying, you know, you should be trying to do huge amounts because you think, oh, hang on, I've got to do this. So if it's relevant to you, the key thing is it relevant to you? And is it relevant to, if you're doing a bit of horizon scanning, to your customers, your existing or potential customers? If you sort of supplying to the MOD or any government department, I mentioned about the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. They will kind of come from them anyway. You know, so you might be doing things already, yeah, or enough already. Okay, sorry. There was any other questions? There was something popped up in chat there? I don't know if anyone was asking a question or they were just saying thanks and got to go and do some work now.
No, I don't think there's anything in there, so that's okay. Yeah, that's okay. Okay. Well, I just want to say thank you very much. Thank you to Steve and Wendy for doing this. We will be doing another one on 9001. We'll probably combine 9001 changes, which come out, I think, is it September? Well, so we'll do 9001 and we'll probably do 14,001 and the crossover. And we've got a couple of round tables planned as well. Sorry, there's something there, just ignoring that. Yeah, we've got a couple of other things planned for the autumn time. So I will ping you information about those. And if anybody wants to, the round table obviously is going to be more face-to-face. So it's a discussion about some of the crossovers between the different standards and how you can try and reduce some of the workload involved around the combinations of the different ones. So on that note, I'm going to say thank you very much. If you haven't had your lunch, go and grab it now, and we'll hopefully see you in the autumn.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that was really good, Wendy. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thank
you. Okay,
thank
bye.
you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Nice to see you again as well.
Bye.
Okay, bye.